Okay, hello everyone. Allow me to introduce Simon Collins and Matthew Botell. They're both the co-founders of TradeCloud, veterans in the commodities industry who used to travel extensively for business. And I'm Gayane. I'll be moderating this mini debate. We're here to talk about business travel because during one of our recent marketing planning meetings, we were discussing TradeCloud's participation in upcoming industry events. And we got to talking about the uncertainty of our current situation because in an industry, especially like the commodities, where business used to rely heavily on travel, events, networking, and building relationships with potential partners in person, COVID has certainly introduced many changes, which is why we wanted to discuss the state of business travel in 2022, how it's affecting companies, and how its importance has evolved over the last couple of years. We're going to be debating on the pros and cons of business travel. So Matt, why don't you begin with your stance on the issue, and why don't you start off with relationships?
Thank you very much, Guy. I'm going to be arguing for business travel, Simon against, and I'm still very passionate about the need for business travel. I appreciate that maybe some meetings are not essential, but I still consider business travel to be the lifeblood of trading companies and companies in general, which are dealing in the commodity industry. Relationships are so important, not just as to whether you get invited to a tender or if material becomes available that you are phoned up and considered. But if things go wrong during the execution of a business, you need to have built that trust with your customer so that you can resolve issues amicably. And I believe there's no substitute for being face-to-face, for breaking bread. So you go and have a meal with them, you're in a different environment, you're more relaxed, and people get to know each other a little bit more. And I think with that, it's a lot easier to do face-to-face than what is infinitely better than it was 10 years ago, but Zoom, Teams, whatever you're using, it's still relatively impersonal.
But it does come at a cost.
This is
true.
It
definitely comes at a cost, Guyane, and that's a really valid point. I mean, we've seen some really big changes in the last 2 years, and you know, in my view, it's kind of brought forward maybe changes that we would have expected over 10 years. You know, and of course, a big part of that is not being able to meet people and then finding a solution to that. But, you know, humans are very innovative and digital tools have changed significantly. So, you know, that has allowed the world of commerce to continue despite all the difficulties of the pandemic. At the same time, of course, you know, companies have saved significant amount of money on travel because just nobody's been able to travel. And, you know, my experience of corporate life is that once savings are made, then they tend to be baked into the culture. And it will be interesting to see how companies will, you know, respond and whether they're going to open the money pot again to allow people travel business class everywhere around the world at a drop of a hat, which was, I would say, the way it was before. You know, and also we're in an inflationary environment, and you know, are we going to see cheap travel continuing? We can see the oil price is very strong, and therefore jet fuel price will be strong, and the cost of travel will be increasing. Also, labor market is tight, and you need crew to fly planes. So, don't expect those business class tickets to New York to be too cheap. And then I think another thing which is a big factor and has actually changed during the pandemic quite significantly is the issue around carbon. And there's no doubt that, you know, traveling is a carbon intensive activity. And with a lot of companies pledging net zero by 2050 and reducing their carbon impact, let's say by 50% by 2030, then they're going to have to think about travel as well as many other factors.
Yes, that's right. Especially the issue of environment becoming increasingly important for companies and who they choose to do business with. But then another issue comes into play here, which is the actual quality of the meetings. How does travel and in-person meetings differ from, let's say, the digital version?
Well, in my opinion and my experience, I think you have better meetings if you're face to face. There's no ambiguity about what is being said. You have less of a time limit with Zoom or team meetings being typically 1 hour long. If I'm expecting someone to arrive and they've traveled by a plane, for example, to come and see me, I'm going to make sure I'm prepared, and I'm going to make sure that all of the stakeholders that need to be there and decision makers are there because they've made an effort. Whereas if it's on a video call, if somebody misses that call, it's not such an inconvenience. But it may be an inconvenience to me because I'm hoping to achieve something, and maybe the next slot for my video is only in 2 weeks' time. And it's this kind of lethargy and slow-moving dialogue which can really be cut through by face-to-face meetings, and you can basically achieve something there on the spot.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, Matthew, and I would tend to agree with Matthew that there's face-to-face meeting is a very, very powerful thing. The whole body language, the discussion, and also, as somebody actually said to me, the issue around serendipity as well. This chance meeting, and this is not something that happens on Team or Zooms, At the same time, when you have a Zoom, it lasts an hour, so you can plan your time. Whereas, of course, if you have to travel to somebody, it can take you the day by the time, you're there from start to finish. And interestingly, I was in London last week, and actually organizing and coordinating meetings was very, very difficult. Partly because people are not in the office. So, before you could go to London, you could guarantee that, a good portion of the people would be sitting in their office behind their desk, and you could grab them for a coffee or a lunch or dinner, and it was relatively straightforward. But now some people are in on Monday, some people are out on Friday, and, it's complicated.
Yes, that's true. But in your personal experience, gentlemen, have you found that you prefer the old way of doing business and meeting in person, or have these 2 years somehow made the transition easier on you, especially in the commodities industry? Do you think your business in particular suffers from digital, or does it play to your advantage?
I think in our business, for sure, trying to explain what TradeCloud is to customers, trying to get the right stakeholders onto calls, and ultimately to have companies make decisions. For sure, it's easier face to face. For all the reasons that I've said before, you do tend to get the right people in the room. They do tend to appreciate that you've spent the time and effort to come and see them. They can see the people behind. You talk about the business because you've got not an hour, but maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, so they can understand that, these guys do actually know what they're talking about, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all that trust and understanding, which I think trust is a very strong word in our business. So yes, I think on one side we're selling digitization, which does for sure make life a lot easier in this kind of situation. But actually, for us trying to lead people through the process of digital change, it's definitely been hindered by the lack of travel, and as Simon says, the lack of availability of people in offices all in one place.
Thank you, Matt.
So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, maybe you wanted to ask a question, Diane. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Simon.
I mean, I think the 2 years that have passed that we've just been through, in that period, you know, digital's really become baked in, and it's not just about communication, okay, whether that be phone or be by Teams and Zoom, etc. But also, if you look at documentation, you know, there were many people putting physical contracts in a parcel, posting them, etc., signing them, etc. Again, these things were not possible over the last, you know, 24 months, simply because people weren't in the office, so you're sending it to nowhere. So what happened? Suddenly, you know, DocuSign is appearing, and you know, more collaborative tools. So we find solutions, but also through finding those solutions, we also find a lot of efficiency gains and cost benefits as well. And I think, you know, through history of business is that we see that companies that really embrace technology are in the end the ones that work the most efficiently, will save the most amount of cost, and will also gain the most amount of customers. That's, you know, for me, part of the digital journey. It has to have a beginning, but the result in the end is one which is kind of superior to the status quo, I would say.
Yes, thank you, Simon. So, gentlemen, considering the format of our debate, which is online, we want to keep this a little bit short. Matt, why don't you finish off with your main arguments, and how do you want to hit home your idea of business travel? And then we'll pass it over to Simon.
Okay, I mean, definitely building relationships, better quality meetings with the right attention, easier to negotiate and conclude business. I think travel can energize with different ideas that it stimulates through just having a more relaxed conversation rather than a hurried hour. But I would agree that in the future, I do not think we'll be travel in quite the way that we used to. For example, when I traded, the most powerful use of my time in the air was spent going to certain conferences. So the London Metal Exchange Week, you'd build 40 meetings around that. The International Zinc Association in California in February, the same sort of thing. The whole industry, the relevant people are there in one hotel. And it allows you to have very efficient use of your time, which then allows you to benefit from the lower carbon, etc., because you're not traveling to 40 different places, you're traveling to one place. So I think it will be less travel is how I would, if I was running a trading company today, I would be saying, look, travel is still very important, but you don't go for the sake of it. Okay, and I think different companies will travel more and different companies will travel less, depending on whether they have representation near their key customers. If you've got a big customer in Seoul and you've got an office in Seoul, then do you need the head office to go down there all the time? But I still do believe that whilst cost is an issue, that ultimately profitability is the bigger issue. And I do believe that it's the best money that the company spends on travel. But I also appreciate and agree with the concept that we should be traveling less because of our carbon footprints.
Thank you, Matt.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with Matthew that, you know, business travel will continue. And I think we've got a lot of catching up to do during 2020 as restrictions are lifted. Even then, industry experts think that business travel will be down 20% this year in comparison to 2019. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's probably light. I think it'd probably be down more like 30%, even 40%. But I think, you know, most of the airlines have forecast that they are expecting a long-term drag from COVID, And also, I think people will be more rational about where they travel going forward. So I think business travel will be reduced. 20–30% is probably the long-term effect. And as I said before, the digital has become baked into our DNA now, and jumping on a video call, at a moment's notice has become the norm. And I think that will certainly continue. Who knows what will happen with the metaverse and how these tools will improve collaboration across digital in the future. I think it's certainly there to stay. And there are many other tools like TradeCloud, which are going to be available across the cloud to improve people's efficiency and collaboration online.
Thank you very much, Simon. And thank you, gentlemen, both, for your time and for expressing your compelling arguments. As of now, it remains to be seen whether things will bounce back to their pre-COVID state in terms of travel, or whether changes in perception are here to stay. The likelihood is that it's probably going to be a mix of what we had before to what we have now. To our viewers, thank you very much for listening. And what are your thoughts on the issue? We want to hear from you. Please leave your comments down below. And bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.